Christina and Thompson. It was a peaceful Sunday evening on September 28, 2014, when Christina and Thompson returned home with her two young daughters after spending a pleasant time at her mother's house. The warmth of the family filled the home as they settled down for the night, unaware that something horrific was about to unfold. When dinner time approached, Christina's husband prepared a bowl of cereal for her, a seemingly ordinary gesture that would soon take a dark and fatal turn. Christina and Thompson had been born on September 16, 1978, in Flint, Michigan, into the loving household of Katie and Harvey and Thompson. Although the family rejoiced at Christina's arrival, they were also enduring a difficult period as Harvey was suffering from leukemia. Doctors, aware of possible hereditary risks, advised the couple to keep a close watch on Christina's health. As a result, Christina spent her early childhood under careful medical observation. Sadly, just before she turned 9 months old, her father passed away. Following Harvey's death, Katie leaned on her mother, Catherine, and her mother-in-law for help. Together, they lovingly cared for Christina and were relieved to see that she was not only healthy, but also full of energy. One memorable moment came when Christina took her first steps before her first birthday. In 1980, while walking along one of Flint's busy streets, Katie encountered James. Born on July 16, 1957, in Flint, James had recently earned a degree in science and was employed by a company that produced mechanical parts. Enchanted by Katie's radiant smile and sparkling eyes, James quickly fell for her, and their whirlwind romance soon turned into marriage. James became the only father figure Christina ever knew, and their bond deepened with time. Hardworking, intelligent, and well-organized, James balanced his position at the factory with part-time teaching at the university he had attended. The family flourished, and their joy expanded in 1983 when they welcomed their first daughter together. This happy occasion coincided with a new job opportunity for James that required them to relocate to Florida. Once they settled in Florida, Christina excelled in her studies. Friendly, compassionate, and dependable, she earned the admiration of both teachers and classmates, while at home, Katie could not have been prouder. Christina's affection for her family was unmistakable, particularly during gatherings. She treasured trips back to Michigan to visit her grandmothers, preserving these memories in photo albums she made herself, inspired by her love of scrapbooking. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. James's professional path later took the family to Indiana and eventually to North Carolina. During that period, Christina voiced her wish to become more engaged in church activities and to receive the sacraments. Her deepening faith soon extended to the entire family, as attending church services every week became a cherished routine. In 1993, the family finally moved back to Michigan, settling into a home in Davison. Shortly afterward, Katie gave birth to their third daughter. By then, Christina was in high school and had joined the swim team. Her enthusiasm for sports continued to grow, and she became a passionate supporter of Michigan's hockey and baseball teams, often gathering her family at home to enjoy games together. After graduating from high school in 1996, Christina decided to enter the workforce rather than pursue higher education. She obtained a position at a fast food restaurant located inside a hospital. Despite being young and inexperienced, Christina's warm personality and customer-focused attitude quickly won over her co-workers and supervisors. She enjoyed her job so much that she even began considering a long-term career in the food service industry. 2 years later, at a party, Christina met Jason Thomas Harris. Born in Davison in 1974, Jason was one of 3 children of Teresa and James Harris. Although only 4 years older than Christina, Jason had already lived through a great deal, including a divorce and fathering 2 children from his first marriage. He worked as a laborer in a plastic manufacturing plant. Although Jason was more reserved and even somewhat shy compared to Christina, this contrast did not deter him from pursuing her after their first meeting. Over time, he won Christina's affection, and in 2003, after 5 years of dating and being viewed by family and friends as the perfect couple, they got married. During the ceremony, Christina's sisters could clearly see her immense joy. One of Christina's strongest wishes was to become a mother, but due to financial limitations, they decided to wait until the time was right. At last, in November 2009, their dream was realized with the birth of their daughter, Haley. Determined to be a devoted and attentive mother, Christina made raising her child her highest priority. Meanwhile, her dedication at work paid off when in mid-2013 she was promoted to branch manager, an achievement that filled her family with pride. Along with this promotion came a life insurance policy valued at $100,000. Not long afterward, in October of the same year, Christina learned she was pregnant with their second child. However, behind the seemingly happy exterior of their household, Jason was secretly engaging in flirtatious exchanges via chat, text messages, and social media with several women, including one from Rhode Island whose identity remains unknown. When Christina discovered this, their relationship grew tense, resulting in frequent arguments. At one point, Jason even threatened to harm her. Frustrated by her constant complaints, he confided in his sister Rachel, telling her that he was willing to get rid of Christina. Rachel, noticing the seriousness in his tone, later expressed her concern to their brother. However, after giving it some thought, she concluded that Jason's remarks had likely been made in a fit of anger due to the tension in his marriage, and reassured their brother that Jason was probably only considering divorce. Christina, distressed by the worsening state of her relationship, confided in her family about how unbearable living with Jason had become. She also revealed her fears to a co-worker, telling him that if anything bad ever happened to her, Jason would be the one responsible. In May 2014, when Christina and Jason welcomed their second daughter, the ever-careful Christina made sure to prepare reserves of breast milk for the baby, some of which were stored by her mother, who often helped care for the child. While Christina tried her best to care for her daughters and continue performing well at work, Jason began spreading falsehoods. He told his siblings and co-workers that Christina was suffering from postpartum depression and was confined to bed. Beyond fabricating lies about her mental state, he went as far as to defame her, spreading groundless accusations. Some people even overheard him questioning whether he was truly the biological father of their newborn. Curious and weary of Jason's ongoing complaints about his marriage, one of his co-workers asked him why he didn't simply file for divorce. Jason responded that divorcing Christina would mean paying child support and losing custody of his children. It appears that from that moment, Jason began crafting a plan to eliminate his wife, intending to collect her life insurance payout and possibly secure compensation from her employer. One night in August 2014, after obtaining sedatives from another person, Jason crushed them into a drink he gave to Christina. However, she noticed an unusual taste and poured it out after taking just one sip, much to Jason's irritation. His second attempt ended the same way. Unwilling to abandon his malicious plan, Jason asked a co-worker named David for a drug that would not alter the flavor. But after Jason revealed his murderous intentions, David immediately refused to assist him. The following month, Jason, convinced he had found a final solution, hired a man to kill Christina, offering $10,000 in payment. However, just a few days later, the man was arrested for an unrelated offense. Furious over yet another failure, Jason confided in a co-worker named Zachary about what had transpired. Believing it to be a dark joke, Zachary laughed, assuming Jason was merely venting about his marital problems. But Jason's seriousness became clear when he offered Zachary money to carry out the murder. Realizing the severity of what he had heard, Zachary instantly ended the conversation and distanced himself from Jason. Undeterred, Jason reverted to his original plan, this time ensuring he obtained an illegal opioid, convinced it could be mixed with milk without being detected. On Sunday, September 28, 2014, after spending the afternoon at her mother's house so the girls could see their grandparents, Christina returned home with her daughters. That evening, as the family prepared for dinner, her husband made her a bowl of cereal, secretly adding the narcotic to it. Unaware of anything unusual, Christina ate the cereal, and within minutes, she began to feel drowsy and went to bed under the influence of the substance. A few hours later, she showed no signs of life. The next morning, Jason behaved as though his wife was simply asleep, dropped their daughters off at daycare, and went to work. Later that morning, he texted a trusted neighbor, asking her to check on Christina since she wasn't answering his calls. The neighbor noticed Christina's car parked outside, but, after knocking repeatedly without receiving an answer, decided to go inside. When she reached the bedroom and saw Christina lying in bed, she texted Jason to ask if she should wake her. Jason replied that Christina was probably just very tired and that he would come home immediately. However, As the neighbor got closer, she noticed how pale Christina looked and quickly contacted emergency services. While paramedics were en route, she also called a nurse who lived nearby. The nurse arrived first and confirmed that Christina's body was stiff and without a pulse. When police and paramedics arrived, it was evident that nothing could be done. Later that morning, Jason returned home but entered the house without saying a word to the neighbor who had tried to help. Those present observed that he appeared neither anxious nor emotionally affected by the gravity of the situation. When questioned by investigators, Jason stated that the night before, he had prepared a bowl of cereal for his wife. He said he noticed she was struggling to hold the spoon and spilled some of the cereal, so he suggested that she go to bed. He claimed that he later joined her and, upon waking in the morning, found her lying beside him as though she had experienced a restless night. Since he needed to leave for work, he said he let her sleep. A brief inspection by the officers revealed no signs on the bed or sheets indicating that anyone other than Christina had slept there. Afterward, Jason called his in-laws to inform them of Christina's passing. Shocked and heartbroken, they struggled to comprehend what had happened, as Christina had seemed full of energy and life only hours earlier. Meanwhile, Jason, showing almost no emotion, waited for the officers to depart, dismissed the concerned neighbors who had come to offer their support, and remained alone in the house. Taking advantage of the quiet, he called his wife's supervisor and, while recounting the morning's events, asked about the procedure for claiming Christina's life insurance policy. That night, as he had done many times before, Jason exchanged messages with one of the women he frequently flirted with. This time, their conversation included details about his wife's recent death. Yet, the woman on the other end of the chat detected no trace of grief or sadness in the newly widowed man. Later that Monday, as Jason stood near the front door of his home, the neighbor who had attempted to help Christina approached to offer sympathy. To her surprise, Jason instead began speaking poorly of Christina, causing the neighbor to leave shortly thereafter. The following day, Tuesday, September 30th, 2014, Christina's family went to the police department, pleading with officers to conduct a deeper investigation, certain that her death had not been accidental. It was not only her relatives who made this request. Jason's own siblings also went to the station to inform authorities about the couple's strained relationship and to share what they knew about Jason's dark remarks and intentions. However, since these statements were considered hearsay, investigators explained that they could not act without concrete proof. Meanwhile, to the shock of his neighbors, and even before Christina's funeral had taken place, Jason moved one of his mistresses into the house. Shortly afterward, his older children also came to live there. Christina's parents and sisters, however, knew nothing about any of this. When family and friends gathered on Saturday, October 4th, 2014, for Christina's funeral service, held at Katie's request, attendees were asked not to bring flowers but instead to make donations to help support her daughters. Just 1 week after Christina's death, Jason, accompanied by his mother, went to his late wife's workplace to begin the process of claiming her life insurance. That same day, he also collected a $20,000 widow's benefit from his own employer. Despite continuing his affair, Jason maintained contact with the woman from Rhode Island, and on October 9, 2014, as soon as the funds were deposited into his account, he purchased a plane ticket to visit her in person. A few days later, before departing on his trip, he left his younger daughters in the care of his older children. After a brief stay, Jason returned home. That same week, on Wednesday, October 22, 2014, a urine test led the forensic pathologist to conclude that Christina had died from an accidental overdose, most likely the result of recreational opioid consumption. However, no needle marks were found on her body, nor was there any drug paraphernalia at the scene. This report deeply upset and confused Christina's mother and sisters, as they found the hypothesis offensive and completely implausible. Christina not only didn't take medications, but also had never had issues with drugs or alcohol. Knowing Christina as well as they did, her family was certain she would never have engaged in such practices while nursing her newborn daughter. Given these circumstances, Katie became fully convinced that her daughter had been killed by someone else, and both she and the rest of the family's suspicions pointed directly at Jason. Determined not to rest until justice was served, Katie took the lead. The grieving mother began tirelessly sending emails and messages on social media to the county prosecutor, pleading for assistance. At the same time, The entire family was careful not to let Jason see what they truly thought of him. Concerned for the safety of the little girls, whom they believed were in danger under their father's care, they made every effort to maintain a facade of normalcy. To keep a close watch over her granddaughters, Katie went to Jason's house every day to take care of them, just as her daughter would have wanted. During this period, Jason seemed increasingly out of control. He had taken to using illicit substances and, as if proud of it, made a habit of photographing himself while doing so. At the beginning of 2015, after testing positive for drugs during a screening conducted by his employer, Jason lost his job. Meanwhile, detectives had been discreetly monitoring his activities for some time without his awareness. A crucial part of their investigation involved interviewing his siblings and former coworkers, which exposed his complaints, schemes, and disturbing remarks about his wife. One day, while Katie and her husband were visiting to look after their granddaughters, Jason asked his father-in-law to take his laptop home to see if he could fix a technical issue. James agreed to help and, once home, promptly contacted the authorities to inform them that he had possession of the device. Police quickly obtained a search warrant. When investigators examined the laptop, the first thing they discovered was a photograph of Jason apparently using an illegal drug, the same substance later found in Christina's system. This accumulation of what appeared to be incriminating evidence against Jason only intensified the anguish and frustration of Christina's mother, father, and sisters. Tired of the lack of accountability, they urged investigators to finally question the suspect. However, when officers attempted to do so, they learned that Jason had already retained a lawyer who prevented the interrogation. This setback led the grieving family to push harder, this time with the support of the prosecutor. In August 2016, their persistence paid off when the case was transferred to the Michigan State Police. Furthermore, the family's attorney advised that pursuing a negligence lawsuit against Jason might serve as a more effective first step than immediately seeking criminal charges. After deciding to follow that recommendation, on September 20, 2018, Jason was summoned to testify under oath. The goal was to obtain a direct account from him regarding the events surrounding Christina's death. During questioning, Jason was asked about his apparent concern on the morning of September 29, 2014, regarding Christina's condition. He replied that he simply wanted to know whether she had woken up on time. As the interrogation continued, inconsistencies in his narrative began to surface. He was then confronted with a piece of evidence he did not realize authorities had: the incriminating photograph from his laptop. Jason attempted to defend himself by claiming that the photo had merely been taken to demonstrate to his daughters the dangers and negative effects of certain substances. By that point, his nervousness was clearly visible, and by the conclusion of the hearing, he was ordered to pay Christina's family $2 million in damages. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation remained ongoing, and by the end of that year, police had gathered numerous witness statements. Most importantly, Katie provided the remaining sealed and uncontaminated breast milk samples she had preserved in her freezer. In mid-August 2019, the same forensic specialist who had performed the autopsy 5 years earlier was assigned to analyze the breast milk samples. He found no traces of any substances. Immediately afterward, he revisited the case file with the newly available information. Ultimately, his updated conclusion differed drastically from his initial finding. In his revised report, he stated that Christina's death had not been accidental, but had instead resulted from the deliberate actions of another individual. Consequently, on the morning of Tuesday, August 27, 2019, Jason was arrested and promptly taken to court. There, in the presence of his attorney, the judge formally charged him with first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and the delivery of a controlled substance capable of causing death. Bail was denied. Jason, however, entered a plea of not guilty. During a subsequent press conference, the prosecutor gave a detailed explanation of the evidence that led to the suspect's arrest. He declared, "It appears that Jason has been living a lie. We believe he mixed heroin into Christina's cereal and milk on that tragic morning, after obtaining the drug from someone who likely had no idea of his true intentions, similar to what he had previously attempted with his co-workers." Finally, following an exhaustive review of all forensic findings and documentation, the medical examiner officially reclassified the cause of death as homicide. Jason's trial took place in November 2021. The prosecution focused on persuading the jury that Christina, a loving mother, devoted wife, and hard-working employee whose life had been unjustly taken, had never been a user of illegal substances. Alongside testimony from co-workers, relatives, and friends, the prosecution relied heavily on the analyses of a forensic pathologist and a toxicology expert. Both specialists testified that it would have been virtually impossible for such a high concentration of opioids to enter Christina's body without external involvement. They further emphasized that no drug paraphernalia or residue was discovered at the scene, which would ordinarily be present in genuine overdose cases. As a result, on November 17, 2021, the jury found Jason guilty on all counts. 3 weeks later, on December 10, 2021, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Moving on to the next case. Elle Edwards. This story concerns 26-year-old Elle Edwards. On Christmas Eve, 2022, she was celebrating with friends at a pub in Alley Village, Liverpool, UK. The young woman was lively and attractive. She worked as a cosmetologist at a local beauty salon and also assisted a dermatologist. Elle was naturally cheerful and exceptionally kind, which enabled her to win over even the most demanding clients. She was beautiful and had developed into an excellent professional in her fields. The young woman was upbeat and constantly smiling. Yet, at the same time, she remained determined, always striving toward her goals and ambitions. On December 24, 2022, her sister Lucy flew in from Dubai to spend the holidays with the family, and Elle eagerly anticipated her arrival. They decided to celebrate the long-awaited reunion in style, so the sisters and their friends headed to the local pub. There, they enjoyed themselves immensely, laughing, dancing, and singing karaoke. Amid the festive atmosphere, no one noticed that an individual, devoid of kindness, was nearby. Around 11:50 p.m., an emergency call was made. As the group exited the pub, no fewer than 12 shots were fired, and 2 struck Elle. She sustained a gunshot wound to the head that proved to be extremely serious. The dispatcher immediately directed emergency services to the scene. They arrived urgently, loaded Elle into an ambulance, and rushed her to the local hospital. However, she died en route, as her injuries were incompatible with life. When the police notified the family of the tragedy, they were in shock. Nobody could comprehend how this could have happened to her. No one suspected that this cheerful and beautiful young woman might have deadly enemies. In the early phase of the investigation, detectives had no leads. The assailant had struck suddenly and vanished mysteriously, leaving only spent shell casings and a bleeding victim at the scene. The attack was sudden but methodically executed, leaving Elle no chance of survival. Yet, it remained unclear whether she was the intended target or a random victim of a madman. An unknown vehicle had stopped near the pub entrance, and minutes later the shooting began. In addition to the deceased, 4 other men sustained gunshot wounds of varying severity. All were young adults aged 22 to 33, spending the evening at the pub and residing in nearby towns. Initially, police were inclined to believe that the murdered woman was a random victim. It was known that criminal gangs operated periodically in the area, suggesting that the shooting might have been part of a routine showdown between rival members. However, all of this remained mere speculation, which would need to be verified or refuted during the course of the investigation. Consequently, the detectives probed more deeply into the victim's character, as well as that of the witnesses to the crime. The victim's relatives were at a loss regarding who could have wished Elle dead, as the young women appeared to have no animosities or enemies capable of such horrific acts. The detectives resolved to interview other witnesses and the additional victims of the unknown assailant's gunfire. Furthermore, law enforcement officials requested video surveillance footage from the pub owners. It would be necessary to speak with dozens of people and scrutinize several hours of recorded footage. Multiple police officers were engaged in the extensive investigation. Numerous difficult questions required answers. There were too many victims affected by the attack. Yet, was this a spontaneous act of aggression, or did the perpetrator have a specific target in mind? All witnesses to the incident were interrogated, but examining mobile communication records required additional time. The media were notified to aid the investigation. Law enforcement officials urged anyone with useful information to come forward to the police station, particularly regarding any potential video recordings captured by bystanders, which might reveal the vehicle used by the assailant. Following the crime, the police held a meeting with local residents. The goal of this communication was to encourage individuals possessing valuable information to cooperate with law enforcement. It was assumed that someone might have witnessed the attack or known the identity of the criminal. People were urged not to fear retaliation from criminals or local feuding groups. Community leaders lent support to residents during this challenging period. In addition to these meetings, activists went door to door to engage with neighbors. Specially trained officers worked closely with the victim's family. They began providing support to the family in light of their devastating loss. During this process, it was established that the perpetrator had departed the pub parking lot in a dark-colored vehicle. Eyewitness accounts varied regarding its precise make. It was dark, making identification difficult, but the most probable description was a dark Mercedes-Benz model. Later, this was confirmed through outdoor surveillance cameras. The killer did not immediately open fire, but drove into the parking lot and observed the pub's patrons for a period of time. He positioned himself in the car to have a clear view of the entrance and most of the activity inside. Apparently, he was selecting the most opportune moment to strike. After several minutes of surveillance, when L emerged, the assailant swiftly exited the car, fired 12 rounds, and immediately returned behind the wheel before fleeing the scene. Investigators, upon reviewing the footage, reached a critical conclusion. The shooter had acted alone, with no assistance from anyone. It was impossible to determine the precise route taken by the perpetrator. Consequently, detectives canvassed the local neighborhood, going door to door, describing the vehicle and recounting the details of the incident in an effort to identify the assailant. Continuous street patrols were implemented around the clock, producing results. Just 2 days after the shooting, detectives detained 2 suspects, though no names were disclosed until all details were clarified. However, proving their involvement in the crime proved difficult, particularly because the murder weapon remained unrecovered. Subsequently, detectives issued a public statement affirming that they would not rest until the unidentified shooter was brought to justice. This announcement aimed to reassure the local residents, who were alarmed by the rampant violence and perceived ineffectiveness of the authorities. It was also hypothesized that the attack might have stemmed from a feud between local gangs, in which case L would have been a random victim. Nonetheless, this remained an unverified assumption. During the investigation, it was established that the likely targets could have been Jake Dudley and Kiram Seld, members of the Beechwood gang, who had been present at the pub that evening. It became known that these individuals had been engaged in a prolonged and bitter dispute with another group claiming the same territory. On December 29th, the police apprehended another individual, though he was not the shooter. The suspect had a solid alibi, excluding him as the perpetrator. Nevertheless, detectives suspected he may have been involved in orchestrating the attack. Around the same period, the dark Mercedes in which the assailant had departed the pub parking lot was identified. However, due to insufficient direct evidence, the identity of a third suspect was not disclosed. Complications arose regarding the discovered car. While it was traced via surveillance cameras and positively identified, law enforcement had arrived too late. On December 31st, the police received a report of a fire near the site of the shooting. Upon the arrival of emergency services, they found a vehicle engulfed in flames, similar in appearance to the perpetrator's car. The vehicle was completely destroyed, resulting in the loss of valuable evidence. The perpetrators had evidently realized that law enforcement was tracking them and decided to eliminate a crucial piece of evidence. Although the fire did not completely consume the car, investigators confirmed that it had been used during the shooting. However, the Mercedes did not belong to the perpetrators, having been stolen shortly before the attack. Presumably, the arson was committed deliberately to hinder the investigation following the murder of rivals. On January 11th, 2 additional suspects, a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman, were brought to the police station. They had been arrested in Central Wales. The man's name was Connor Chapman. He was well known to law enforcement, possessing an extensive criminal record accrued over the 5 years preceding L. Edwards' murder. Connor's criminal trajectory began with audacious offenses and progressively descended into deeper criminality. One of his earliest serious offenses was a car theft under aggravating circumstances. He had repeatedly been implicated in robberies, hooliganism, and threatening behavior. On one occasion, he was involved in a police chase, abandoning the vehicle and hiding in nearby bushes. When apprehended, Connor claimed not to understand what chase they were referring to, asserting that he had merely been waiting for a friend. In this instance, he became a prominent figure. Details of his detention appeared in newspaper headlines. Connor Chapman was from Birkenhead, Liverpool. His parents had abandoned him at an early age, and his grandparents formally assumed guardianship. It was in their home that the young man resided. Connor had dropped out of high school shortly before his exams. Overall, his academic performance had been poor, and no special achievements were attributed to him. He was consistently regarded as a problem child. Connor first appeared as a defendant in court in 2014 at the age of 14, accused of shoplifting. By 2016, he had committed another offense. His involvement in a car theft was confirmed when he was apprehended in a stolen vehicle. He lacked both a driver's license and insurance, thereby violating the conditions of his suspended sentence. In 2017, additional charges were added, including high-value theft and possession of prohibited substances. During this period, he was under police supervision, and he violated the restraining order again. Consequently, he was prohibited from accessing several areas of the city. Connor was forbidden from appearing in public spaces, as he clearly posed a societal threat. Despite the restrictions, by 2019, he again violated the ban. Patrol officers apprehended him in a public area. At that time, he was found in possession of a knife and prohibited substances. That same year, the public first became aware of Connor Chapman through media coverage following an unsuccessful attempt to evade the police in a stolen vehicle. City patrol officers spotted a stolen Audi on the streets and ordered the driver to stop and exit the vehicle with hands raised. However, 18-year-old Chapman refused to comply, prompting a police chase. During the brief pursuit, he committed numerous traffic violations. In particular, he accelerated to over 80 kilometers per hour in zones restricted to 30 kilometers per hour. At times, he repeatedly drove into oncoming traffic, eventually crashing into the curb. Traveling at such speed, Kai was thrown to the side and spun around. The driver was unable to continue the chase, so he exited the vehicle and fled on foot. Even then, luck was not on his side, as the patrol caught up with him in the bushes just a few hundred meters away. In his defense, the young man claimed he was waiting for a friend. Yet, the deception was obvious. Connor's lawyer argued in court that his client had fallen under the influence of a bad crowd led by Alder Fraze. The court opted not to punish him, releasing the budding criminal. He was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and several other conditions identified by private specialists during the trial. Despite this, due to his repeated violations and potentially dangerous behavior on the road, he was sentenced to up to 8 months in prison for 2 offenses. The young man also received a driving ban, which took effect after his release. By the time he reached adulthood, the budding criminal had accrued 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes. It was clear he had no intention of reforming and categorically refused to integrate into society. Everyone recognized him as potentially dangerous, yet legal grounds to remove him from society had not been established. This was because, up to that point, no one had been seriously harmed by his reckless behavior. The public expressed outrage at the authorities' impotence. Everything indicated that criminal elements could act freely until they killed or injured innocent people. And that is precisely what happened. In January 2020, the court sentenced Connor Chapman again, this time to 10 months in prison. He had been apprehended once more in a public place, in possession of a cold weapon and prohibited substances, a veritable bouquet of offenses. During this period, the police appeared openly on television, warning the public to be cautious of this young man. After serving his sentence, only a few months later, he became involved in crime again and was wanted for at least 5 additional offenses. When apprehended, the young criminal remarked that he had spent more time behind bars than free. He did not appear upset by this, but rather proud of his achievements. Connor had no intention of stopping. By the age of 20, his criminal record had grown even further. By that time, he had accumulated 19 sentences for 43 crimes. Yet, in the summer of 2022, the reckless young man found himself free once again. This occurred just 6 months prior to the death of L. Edwards. During this period, Connor was again summoned before the court. His lawyer tried to play on pity, telling the story that the first child of the young man was born while he was in prison. At this point, his girlfriend was pregnant with a girl. The young man claimed that he had rethought his life and wanted to get on the path of correction. Of course, these were loud, false words. The only thing he wanted was to get free and return to the path of crime. During this period, the police already knew that he was a member of one of the local criminal gangs engaged in the sale of prohibited substances. However, the criminal was tried not for these serious crimes, but for burglary and theft of 2 electric motorcycles. On December 24, 322, a skirmish broke out between 2 rival criminal gangs. They began to argue over the division of the territory near the wooden church in Beechwood Estates. They failed to reach an agreement, after which the young gangster decided to take revenge. He armed himself with a submachine gun and waited for about 3 hours until he tracked down his targets. He wanted to kill Karen Seld and Jake Duffy, who had gone to the Moyac pub for rest. Shortly before midnight, the criminal drove up to the parking lot and began to observe. He identified his victims and waited for the right moment to attack, then ran out of a car and fired 12 bullets into the building. He managed to seriously injure Duffy, but despite the threat to his life, he survived the attack. However, the unlucky Elle Edwards, who was not so fortunate. 2 bullets hit her in the head. The young beauty fought for her life, but died in the arms of the medics on the way to the hospital. The girl accidentally met the killer's targets that evening, and did not even suspect that the festive revelry could end so tragically. The pub was crowded, then 1 person was killed and 4 were wounded. One 22-year-old man was shot in the leg, a 24-year-old young man was wounded in the arm, and a 33-year-old man in the wrist. None of these injuries were life-threatening. Elle's friends tried to provide her with assistance and perform artificial respiration right on the spot. However, this was not enough to save her life. Elle's sister Lucy was much like you. She lived in Dubai and flew home to celebrate Christmas with her family. Just minutes before the attack, she had left the establishment, so she was not affected at all. Later, Lucy recalled how she had wanted to take her sister with her, but the girl wanted to stay with her friends. On January 25, 2023, the funeral of the young girl took place. Hundreds of concerned people came to say goodbye to the random victim of gang showdowns. The body was brought to the local church in a hearse drawn by 4 white horses. Even the pub that had become the site of the girl's last celebration was closed that day as a mark of respect for her memory. The owner of the establishment published a message of support for Elle's family on his official social media page. Connor Chapman was charged with a whole list of charges, the main one of which was murder. It became known that the perpetrator had an accomplice, namely the 20-year-old Thomas. After the arrest and during the searches, a video recording was found on this young man, which had been made shortly before the attack. In it, Connor is handing over a weapon and saying that he is going to settle accounts with someone. After the attack, they together hid the stolen Mercedes in order to get rid of it later. The murder weapon was never found. However, the killer's DNA traces were found on one of the shell casings fired. It was obvious that it was Connor who loaded the weapon before the attack. In addition, red gloves were found during searches in his house, which were clearly visible in the CCTV footage from morning. After the crime, when the perpetrators had abandoned the car, they ordered a taxi under a false name. They used the driver's services to cover their tracks and confuse the investigation. Around 5 a.m., they returned to the place where the hidden car was located. Here, the criminals tried to cover their tracks. However, something went wrong. Ultimately, they decided to get rid of the car by setting it on fire. Thomas Nord was found guilty on all charges brought against him. In July 2023, the court sentenced him to 9 years in prison. This modest sentence was due to the fact that he had not yet managed to accumulate such a wide criminal history as his accomplice. Jake and Karen were wounded in the moment of the attack, but both managed to survive the assault. A look at their lifestyle made the aggression of one of the members of the rival games quite understandable. Both were members of the local Beechwood gang, which was openly in conflict with another group claiming this territory. It became known that on December 23, 2023, just a day before the attack with firearms, they had already been attacked. On that occasion, another person from Connor Chapman's group had assaulted them. Both were beaten, but did not receive serious injuries. Apparently, they considered this a random fight and calmly went to relax in the pub. While the shooter awaited his sentence in the case of the murder of the innocent victim, both targets of his attack were already in prison. Karen was sentenced to 27 months in prison for an attack on members of the rival criminal group. Another 9 months were added to the sentence for the fight. His friend was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months for a similar offense. Obviously, they were trying to avenge the attempted murder. Prohibitive court orders were also issued against both of them, with a whole list of restrictions. Of course, this method did not allow protecting citizens from this gang of criminals. However, in case of further violations, more severe punishment could be applied to them due to ignoring the prescriptions. There was outrage that potentially dangerous members of criminal gangs were getting away with minimum sentences after each crime. The bans were clearly ineffective and did not contribute absolutely anything to public safety. This became especially obvious when it was found that Chapman already had a ban on visiting that region where the pub was located. But this did not prevent him from stealing a car and coming to the public place, despite the fact that he also had a driving ban. The events that had occurred once again raised the question of toughening punishments and revising the existing norms of the legal system. However, so far this flawed system has not suffered any serious changes. At the trial on the case of L's murder, Connor tried to refute that it was he who appeared on the CCTV footage. According to him, during this period he was at home, packing Christmas gifts. However, a sufficient amount of evidence was collected to expose the lie. The hearings on the case lasted 3.5 weeks, during which all the circumstances preceding the attack were revealed. It became known that the reason for the attack was only the competition between the two criminal gangs dividing the territory nearby. The defendant did not even know the victim. He simply did not care about her fate, as well as the fate of all the other innocent people in the bar. He was driven only by blind fury, which he could never control. After the attempted murder of two competitors, Connor planned to flee to Spain to cover his tracks. He used a stolen car and also disposed of the murder weapon, attempting to avoid falling into the hands of the police. He refrained from using any other mode of transport. The detectives apprehended the criminal literally at the airport. Following his arrest, Connor tried to mislead the police, asserting that the Mercedes he had been seen driving on the day of the murder was not stolen. According to him, it was a common vehicle used by the criminal group for the distribution of substances. The man claimed he was not behind the wheel and continued to insist before the jury that he had not fired any shots that evening. He was desperately attempting to extricate himself from the situation. The defendant stated that he had only recently learned that someone from the criminal group had used the vehicle in the attack on the pub. Before the jury retired to deliberate, the father of the innocent victim delivered a brief speech. He sincerely hoped that the criminal would never again be able to spend Christmas with his loved ones while free. After 3 hours of discussion, the jurors, consisting of Pitiation and Singention, reached a unanimous verdict. They concluded that Connor Chapman was guilty of all charges brought against him. He had cynically committed the crime and showed no remorse for the fact that he had deliberately ended the life of the beautiful 26-year-old girl. The entire future that lay ahead of her was taken away. Instead of remorse, the heartless Connor spent several days meticulously removing all evidence and traces of the murder that could connect him to this bloody act. The motive for the attack was competition between criminal gangs. On July 7, 2023, Connor was sentenced. He received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 48 years from the commencement of his term. Upon the announcement of the verdict, the victim's father triumphantly raised his fist. The incident sparked a wave of public outrage. The city's residents could no longer feel safe, knowing they were situated at the intersection of conflict between criminal gangs dividing territories. They were aware that these individuals possessed large quantities of firearms and were unafraid to use them, as evidenced by the murder of L. The girl's father stated that he intended to establish a foundation to support victims like his daughter. He believed its primary goal would be to combat and reduce the number of weapons in civilian hands. Moving on to the next case. Jolene Cummings. The disappearance of 33-year-old Jolene Cummings stunned even experienced detectives. Jolene, a mother of 3, resided in Fernandina Beach and was in the process of divorcing her husband, Jason. While Jolene and their children lived in a Fernandina Beach home, Jason had moved to a nearby city and maintained weekend visitations with the kids. Jolene worked as a hairdresser at Tangle's Hair Salon. On Saturday, May 12, 2018, Jolene worked until 5 p.m. The following day, which was both Mother's Day and her 34th birthday, her children were scheduled to be with her. As agreed, Jolene was to meet Jason on Sunday in Hilliard at the Winn-Dixie supermarket parking lot to pick up the children. Jason brought the kids, but Jolene did not arrive. All attempts to reach her by phone failed. Her mother and Johnson, who wanted to wish Jolene a happy birthday, also could not get through, as all calls went straight to voicemail. After being unable to contact Jolene, Jason reached out to and to inquire about the children. Learning that Jolene had not picked them up, and became worried, as this behavior was out of character for her daughter. When and could not reach Jolene on Monday, May 14th, she filed a missing person report with the authorities. The police quickly launched an investigation, releasing a poster with Jolene's photo and issuing an all-points bulletin for her 2006 Ford Expedition. And Johnson made a public appeal for assistance in locating her daughter, urging anyone with information to come forward. Jolene's disappearance was devastating for Anne, who pleaded with anyone possessing knowledge to report it. That same day, police and volunteers searched the forested areas near Jolene's home, but their efforts yielded no results. The salon where Jolene worked was closed on Sunday and Monday. Police established that Jolene was last seen on Saturday, May 12th, when she left work. According to the salon owner, Jolene and Jennifer, another hairdresser, had been scheduled to work together that day. In a phone call, Jennifer told her boss that she and Jolene closed the salon at 5 p.m. and each departed in their own vehicles. Police determined that Jolene last used her phone to make an outgoing call while still at work on May 12th. Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper appealed to anyone who had been a customer of Tangle's salon or was in the vicinity on May 12th to contact law enforcement. Jolene's relatives and friends did not believe she had disappeared voluntarily. The salon owner, where Jolene had been employed for 6 years, shared that skepticism. It was difficult for them to imagine her abandoning her children. Police were determined to uncover at least one lead and began investigating Jolene's personal life. Recognizing that divorces and child custody disputes often provoke hostility, they focused their attention on Jason. Meanwhile, detectives learned that just 5 days prior to Jolene's disappearance, a neighbor had reported a loud argument to police. It emerged that Jolene had been involved in a confrontation with her ex-boyfriend, Jason G., and their children had witnessed the altercation. Jason had asked Jolene if he could stay with her temporarily, but she refused. Enraged by the refusal, he began vandalizing everything in sight. The reason for her refusal was that police were actively searching for Jason due to his parole violations. By the time law enforcement arrived, Jason had fled the scene. After Jolene vanished, Jason G. became a person of interest in the investigation. 2 days into the case, on May 15, 2018, police found Jason G. hiding inside Jolene's house, where he had apparently remained since the neighbor's report of the loud quarrel. He was arrested and transported to the station for questioning. During questioning, Jason G. claimed he had no involvement in Jolene's disappearance. Meanwhile, police discovered their first critical lead. Jolene Cummings' SUV was located outside a Home Depot hardware store just a few miles from her workplace. The vehicle was undamaged and showed no signs of struggle. On May 15th, police visited the salon where Jolene worked, marking the first working day after a 2-day closure. They arrived at 10 a.m. to speak with Jennifer Seibert, an employee who claimed to have been the last person to see Jolene and to have closed the salon with her before the weekend. However, Jennifer did not appear for work, citing an urgent matter in another city. CCTV footage provided key evidence regarding Jolene's disappearance. The footage showed Jolene's car entering the hardware store parking lot, where it was later found. Notably, Jennifer had claimed that she and Jolene had closed the salon at 5 p.m. on May 12th, but the footage showed Jolene's vehicle arriving at the hardware store at 1:17 a.m. on May 13th, a gap of 8 hours and 17 minutes. CCTV also revealed Jennifer visiting a gas station across the street from the hardware store. Footage from the station showed her entering, purchasing a bottle of water, and asking an employee to call a taxi, which later transported her to her workplace. The gas station employee reported that Jennifer appeared agitated and had fresh facial abrasions. As a result, Jennifer Seibert became the primary suspect, prompting police to launch a search for her. Upon verifying the address she had provided when applying for her job, detectives discovered it was fictitious. Jennifer attempted to evade capture, but was unsuccessful. On May 16th, patrol officers spotted a black Kia Soul belonging to Jennifer parked in a recreation area between 2 trucks, approximately 50 meters from her salon. Upon approaching the vehicle, they found Jennifer asleep inside. She was arrested and initially charged with stealing Jolene Cummings' car. At the station, Detectives noticed abrasions on her hands and face and asked her to explain how she had sustained them. She claimed her facial abrasions were from bed bug bites. Police soon discovered that she had no permanent residence, mostly sleeping in her car and using showers at a fitness center. Following her arrest, investigators uncovered a startling truth. Jennifer Seibert was not her real name. Her true identity was Kimberly Kessler, born in 1968, who had been reported missing in Pennsylvania in 2012. The name Jennifer Marie Seibert actually belonged to a 13-year-old girl who died in a car accident in Germany in 1987 and was buried in Butler Cemetery, Pennsylvania. During a videotaped interview 48 hours later, Kimberly, dressed in an orange jumpsuit and seated calmly on a couch, disclosed her true identity. "When you run my fingerprints, they'll come up as Kimberly Lee Kessler. I'm 50 years old, and I've been on the run for over 25 years. Further investigation revealed that Kimberly began using other people's names in 1996 while living in Pennsylvania. Over the years, she adopted at least 18 aliases and lived in 33 cities across 14 states. Many of these names were similar, and she had taken at least half from gravestones and cemeteries, later obtaining fake documents to support her fabricated identities. One of the aliases she used was Jennifer Seibert. In 2012, Connie Kessler, Kimberly's mother, reported her daughter missing, despite not having heard from her since 2004. This 8-year delay highlights the strained family relationship. Pennsylvania authorities investigated Kimberly's disappearance and concluded she was voluntarily missing, though it remains unclear on what basis this determination was made or whether further investigation followed. Had police located her earlier, they might have discovered her use of false identities. Several questions remain unanswered. Why did Kimberly flee, and why did she maintain multiple aliases? Connie Kessler suggested that her daughter had faced multiple challenges, including an abusive relationship in 2004. Kimberly gave birth to a son, Evan, but after the relationship ended, the father gained custody and prohibited Kimberly from seeing the child. The father later moved to another state and falsely informed Kimberly that Evan had died. Frustrated by the lack of answers, Kimberly sought to locate her son and uncover the truth about his fate. Connie theorizes that Kimberly's use of aliases was motivated by fear of Evan's father. According to Tim Edwards, Evan's father, the circumstances differed. He asserts that his relationship with Melissa McKernan between 1997 and 1999 resulted in the birth of their son, Evan. Melissa Kessler's use of multiple aliases appears to have been a deliberate attempt to remain hidden from her family, including her mother, and to obscure her past. Following her separation from Tim Edwards, she retained custody of their son, Evan, and denied Tim visitation. In 1999, when Evan was about 15 months old, social services intervened and removed him from Melissa's care, after which she fled the city, disappearing from Tim's life. Tim did not inform Melissa that Evan had been taken, and she lost all contact with him. By the time Jolene Cummings disappeared in 2018, Evan was 20 years old and had never seen a photo of his biological mother until FBI agents visited their home to investigate Kimberly Kessler's past. However, inconsistencies in the timeline raise questions. Connie Kessler claimed Kimberly gave birth to Evan in 2004, yet Tim Edwards' records indicate Evan was born in 1998. This discrepancy suggests Connie may not have been fully informed and casts doubt on her theory that Kimberly assumed false identities to locate Evan while avoiding detection. Kimberly herself failed to give coherent reasons for her use of multiple names when questioned by detectives. Turning back to the Jolene Cummings case, law enforcement uncovered a series of actions that linked Kimberly Kessler to the disappearance. Charges of forgery were filed after investigators searched a storage unit rented by Kessler, where they found 4 wigs, a bag containing 2 severed hair tails, 3 mobile phones, and other items. The most damning evidence was the presence of Jolene Cummings' DNA on Kessler's sock and shoe. In her vehicle, police also discovered scissors carrying Jolene's DNA. Blue plastic containers, later recovered, would prove significant in connecting Kessler to the crime. Further evidence came from Kessler's phone search history, which revealed premeditation. On April 30, 2018, at 3:36 a.m., she searched for information on a man charged with murder after his coworkers' remains were found in his yard. On May 8 at 1:37 a.m., she looked up cases involving individuals convicted of murder where the body was never found. These searches suggest that Kessler had been planning her actions regarding Jolene and gathering information to conceal the crime. Later that day, at 7:13 a.m., Kessler searched for advice on injecting and how to use a tourniquet. She also looked up a list of female murderers by country on a website called Murderpedia, as well as a list of female murderers in Florida. Finally, she searched for information on autopsy and postmortem changes at 6:33 p.m. The owner of the hair salon where Jolene worked reported that the plant in the pot inside the salon had been replaced. This draws attention to Kessler's search queries on May 13th, the day Jolene failed to pick up her kids. At 12:05 p.m., Kessler searched for indoor palm and then variation palm tree. A minute later, at 12:06 p.m., the police examined CCTV footage from a hypermarket selling household goods, located a few hundred yards from the Tangles hair salon. The footage showed Kessler arriving at the hypermarket on May 14th at 2:39 p.m. and leaving the store half an hour later with a plant, which would later end up at the hair salon on May 15th at 6:13 p.m. 2 days later, on May 16th at 6:27 p.m., Kessler searched online for Jolene Cummings. I have vanished and no body, no crime. Forensic experts used luminol and ultraviolet light to investigate the hair salon, and their findings suggested that a serious crime had taken place there. The entire room glowed under the ultraviolet light, indicating the presence of blood or other bodily fluids. On May 22nd, the sheriff held a press conference during which he announced, "We have gathered sufficient evidence, although some of it will remain undisclosed for the time being to protect the ongoing investigation. Sadly, our evidence leads us to conclude that Jolene Cummings has likely died." The investigators learned that about a week before her disappearance, Jolene shared her suspicions with a colleague at the Tangles salon. She thought their new hairdresser, Jennifer, was hiding something and wasn't being genuine. According to some salon clients, the relationship between Jolene and Jennifer was strained. One client even witnessed a heated argument between the two women on May 9th, just 3 days before Jolene vanished. The Tangles hair salon closed on June 5, 2018, but crucial evidence emerged that shed light on the fate of Jolene Cummings. Surveillance footage captured Kimberly Kessler at the back of the building at least 4 times, handling large white garbage bags. At 8 a.m., she was seen disposing of one heavy bag, followed 14 minutes later by another. In a fourth recording, just before midnight, Kessler was caught lifting a waste container, suggesting it contained something substantial. Walmart self-checkout footage provided further insight. Kessler had purchased garbage bags, cleaning agents, latex gloves, and notably, an electric knife. This prompted law enforcement to trace the waste disposal, discovering that a local company had been dumping trash in a Georgia landfill. A team of nearly 200 personnel combed through the landfill for a week, uncovering several key items. Near the dumpster where Kessler had discarded the white bags, police recovered women's shoes, a piece of jewelry, and a blue plastic container. The container matched one found in Kessler's storage unit and tested positive for Jolene Cummings' DNA. Although Jolene's body was never recovered, the amassed evidence led to Kessler's arrest for murder. On January 17, 2019, Kimberly Kessler appeared in court and entered a not guilty plea. The trial, however, was delayed for years due to concerns about her mental stability. During this period, Kessler engaged in a hunger strike, dropping to under 88 pounds, and her court appearances were frequently marked by outbursts. Before the 2021 session, she underwent compulsory treatment and was deemed fit to stand trial. On December 9, 2021, the jury found Kessler guilty, and on January 27, 2022, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Prosecutors believe her motive was to silence Jolene Cummings, who threatened to expose her lies during a press conference. Sheriff Leeper expressed satisfaction with the verdict, confirming that Kessler would spend the remainder of her life in Florida State Prison, though Jolene Cummings' body remains missing. Moving on to the next case. Kyle Clinkscales. 22-year-old Kyle Clinkscales lived in LaGrange, Georgia, in 1976. The sports-enthusiastic young man was attending Auburn University in Alabama. At the university, he had begun to search for his purpose in life and was planning which career path to follow. On January 27, 1976, Kyle left his part-time job at a bar in LaGrange and started his roughly 45-minute drive to Auburn University, where he was a sophomore. Kyle never reached the university. When his parents were unable to contact him, they reported him missing. Nothing unusual was found in Kyle's apartment to indicate that he had run away or moved elsewhere. Investigators concluded that something had occurred during his journey. They simply did not know what it might have been. The Troup County Sheriff's Office and Kyle's parents carried out an intense search for him in the early weeks following his disappearance. Lakes were drained. Rewards were offered. Deputies scoured wooded areas for even a single clue. For Kyle's parents, John and Louise Clinkscales, the search became an emotional and consuming mission, resembling countless other missing person cases across the nation. Where families pleaded for leads, searchers grew weary with each failed attempt, and the local community watched in disbelief that such a tragedy could befall one of their own. Their persistence became a source of admiration for many. Kyle Clinkscales had always been fond of New Orleans, so his parents purchased advertisements in the city asking for assistance in finding their son. He had loved Hawaii after visiting once as a child on vacation, prompting his parents to send letters to every police department in the state. Whenever tips emerged that someone fitting his description, strong jaw, shaggy brown hair, thick eyebrows, had been located, they drove to the areas where those leads originated. 2 years after Kyle's disappearance, the Clinkscales family had distributed almost 5,000 bumper stickers requesting information. They became advocates for other families with missing loved ones and worked to draw attention to lesser-known cases. In 1985, the Clinkscales were among those invited to the White House to meet President Ronald Reagan to discuss solutions for the issue of missing and exploited children. In their home, the same one where Kyle had grown up and which was adorned with pictures of him smiling and wearing a bow tie, his parents' determination to find him would at times yield to exhaustion. In a 1978 interview, John Clinkscales expressed his uneasiness. Perhaps, he said, his son, who had not particularly enjoyed college, might have felt like a financial burden to his parents. Instead of quitting school or sharing his worries, maybe he simply wanted to make things easier for them by disappearing. Every time Louise and John Clinkscales left their home in LaGrange, Georgia, to search for their missing son, one of them would always leave a note behind. If Kyle returned while they were away, they wanted him to know that much had changed since he was last seen in 1976. They loved him, the Clinkscales wrote, and on the dining room table, they left a spare car key for him. Both John and Louise Clinkscales provided their DNA samples to investigators for comparison in case their son's remains were ever discovered. Sadly, John Clinkscales passed away in 2007, and Louise passed away in January 2021 at the age of 92. A driver in Cusseta, Alabama, about 30 miles southwest of LaGrange, was traveling on a two-lane road on December 7, 2021, when he noticed the hatchback of a rusted vehicle protruding from a creek and alerted authorities. The vehicle was identified as a 1974 Ford Pinto partially submerged in the water. Inside the decayed car were human remains and roughly 50 skeletal fragments embedded in the mud. It remained uncertain what caused the car to suddenly become visible from the road after so many years. In February 2023, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the remains belonged to Kyle Clinkscales. The creek where the car was recovered, located in Chambers County, Alabama, just outside LaGrange, had never been searched because the road was not considered part of Kyle's usual route to Auburn, though it could have been an alternate path. Aaron Hackley, the coroner of Troup County, Georgia, stated that it might take investigators several months to determine the exact cause of death, if they could identify one at all, given the condition and age of the remains. Ms. Hackley said that when she received the call from investigators confirming the identification, she immediately contacted Kyle's aunt, Martha Morrison, who expressed both relief and sorrow that his parents were no longer alive to hear the news. Martha said they were devout Christians who always believed that things would eventually work out and never lost hope. When Kyle Clinkscales' remains are returned to his family, the plan is to drive to Shadowlawn Cemetery in LaGrange. There, in the soft earth between the graves of his mother and father, he will finally be laid to rest, nestled in the space they had reserved for him so many years ago. Moving on to the next case. Min Lin. Min Lin and Yun Lin's love story began in the late 1980s when they met at an Australian university. Both had come from China to pursue higher education. Min had already completed her bachelor's degree and was doing an internship, while Yun was participating in a student exchange program. Their paths crossed by chance in a university hallway, and from that moment, their connection deepened. After graduation, they married and settled in North Epping, Sydney, where their love blossomed into a strong, close-knit family. Their first child, Brenda Lynn, was born in August 1994. Known for her warmth and intelligence, Brenda became the pride of the family. Their second child, Henry, arrived in 1997, followed by their youngest son, Terry, in 2000. In the early 2000s, Min and Yun decided to start a business together, opening a small newsroom that grew into a thriving news agency and publishing business on Rose Street. Through dedication and hard work, their venture brought them financial stability, a comfortable home, a luxury car, and quality education for their children. Min managed the business operations, while Yun focused on maintaining their home and caring for the children. The Lin family earned the respect and admiration of their neighbors for their work ethic, generosity, and strong family values. Min and Yun were regarded as loving, devoted parents who had raised well-mannered, disciplined children. Brenda stood out for her beauty, academic excellence, and compassion toward animals, while her brothers, Henry and Terry, were energetic boys who shared a passion for soccer. As the Lins became more established in Australia, they began helping relatives relocate from China. Min's parents were the first to join them in North Epping, assisting with childcare. Later, Yun's parents also moved to Sydney, and Min and Yun purchased a small home for them nearby. Yun's sister, Irene, lived with the family for a time, helping around the house and caring for the children. By this point, the Lin family's business had become highly profitable, reportedly generating close to $1 million annually. In late 2007, Min's younger sister, Kathy, and her husband, Robert, decided to move to Australia in search of better prospects. They had visited previously and briefly lived in Melbourne before returning to China, but this time they were determined to settle permanently. Robert, who had been a successful ear, nose, and throat specialist in China, decided to transition into entrepreneurship. He and Kathy invested their savings into opening a restaurant in Sydney. However, the business failed to take off, and Robert's subsequent ventures, including a cafe and a snack bar, also struggled due to his limited experience in business management and financial planning. The Lin family had a long-standing tradition of gathering every Friday night. Their final family get-together took place on July 17, 2009, at the home of Kathy and Min's parents. The next morning, July 18, the Lin family's shop remained closed, leaving their regular customers puzzled and uneasy. The unexpected closure raised alarm, and one concerned customer attempted to contact Min several times but received no answer. Eventually, they reached out to Min's sister, Kathy, to ask if she knew what was happening. Kathy became immediately concerned, as her brother never closed the store without notifying anyone in advance. She tried calling both Min and Yun, but neither of them answered. She also called their home phone, but there was no response. Kathy and her husband, Robert, began to worry deeply, so they decided to visit Min's house to ensure everything was all right. They arrived around 9 a.m. and noticed the family car parked outside. When they approached the house, they found the front door unlocked, but there was no sign of Min or his family inside. Kathy went upstairs, and upon opening the bedroom door, she was met with a horrifying sight. The room was splattered with blood, on the walls, floor, ceiling, furniture, and curtains. On the floor near the bed lay Yun Lin's body, which had been severely mutilated. Kathy screamed in terror and staggered backward, horrified by the gruesome scene. In the adjacent room where Irene usually slept, another horrific discovery awaited. Irene lay motionless on her bed, her face badly bruised and beaten. The bedrooms of Henry, aged 12, and Terry, aged 9, revealed scenes just as disturbing. Both boys had been brutally bludgeoned to death, and their bodies were found in different corners of the room. Min Lin's body was discovered in his own bedroom, covered with a blood-soaked blanket. He appeared to have been killed in the same manner as the rest of his family. Evidence suggested he was the first victim, followed by his wife, her sister, and finally the two children. Kathy immediately called emergency services, while Robert rushed to bring Min and Yun's parents, who lived about 10 kilometers from the scene. Police and paramedics arrived swiftly, confronted by what they later described as one of the most horrifying crime scenes they had ever seen. Tragically, all members of the Lin family had been murdered. Each victim had died from multiple blows to the head inflicted with a heavy blunt instrument, likely a hammer. However, the weapon was not found at the scene. The initial investigation yielded few clues. No valuables were stolen, and the killer had not left the murder weapon behind. This indicated that robbery was not the motive, and that the primary intent was to kill the Lin family. At first, investigators suspected that more than one person might have been involved, as it seemed implausible that a single individual could overpower so many victims. However, evidence later revealed that the children had been awake during the attack and had desperately tried to escape. Bloodstains and splatters were found throughout the house, indicating a violent struggle. Strangely, all the adult victims not only suffered fatal head injuries, but also showed signs of strangulation. Investigators discovered identical bloody shoe prints in each room, all matching the same tread pattern. While they were unable to identify the shoe brand, they determined the shoe size. No usable fingerprints were recovered, suggesting that the killer, or killers, had worn gloves. Initially, police had no suspects or theories regarding the perpetrator's identity. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues all described the Lin family as kind and well-respected, with no known enemies, making the motive for such a brutal massacre deeply puzzling. The attack was determined to have taken place between midnight and 3 a.m. on July 18th. Brenda Lin, the eldest child and the only surviving member of the family, was studying abroad in New Caledonia at the time. When she first heard about the incident on social media, she dismissed it as a misunderstanding, but soon received a tearful call from her Aunt Kathy, confirming the devastating truth. Brenda was immediately flown back to Sydney, where Kathy and her husband Robert met her at the airport. With her family home sealed off as a crime scene, Brenda moved in with them. The next day, still in shock, Brenda was brought to the police station for questioning. She was heartbroken and unable to provide new information, insisting that her family had no conflicts and that everything had seemed normal before her trip. After the tragedy, Brenda inherited her family's assets, including their house, savings, and the successful news agency business. Because she was still a minor, her aunt and uncle, Kathy and Robert, were appointed as her legal guardians and took control of the family estate. Although Brenda's grandparents wished to care for her, Robert strongly objected and even threatened legal action, arguing that they were too elderly to raise a teenager. Eventually, the matter was settled, and Brenda remained under Kathy and Robert's guardianship. The Lin family's shop and publishing business reopened after a temporary closure, but Brenda had no role in its operations. Robert took charge of reviewing the family's finances, including their bank accounts, investments, and real estate holdings. Meanwhile, forensic experts continued to meticulously analyze the crime scene. Despite their efforts, no conclusive leads emerged. Investigators concluded that the killer likely acted alone, entering the house quietly, possibly with a key. The perpetrator wore size 9.5 shoes with a distinctive tread pattern and appeared to have used a hammer as the murder weapon, which was never recovered. The killer had worn gloves, leaving behind no fingerprints or traces of foreign DNA. One particularly notable detail was the presence of bloodstains on the doorknobs of every bedroom where the murders occurred, indicating that the killer's blood-soaked gloves had touched them. However, there were no bloodstains on Brenda's bedroom doorknob, suggesting that the killer knew she was not at home that night. The Lin family tragedy received widespread media attention, but in the absence of solid evidence or suspects, numerous implausible theories began to circulate. Some speculated that the family's supposed great wealth had been the motive for their murder. As the investigation stalled, no concrete suspects surfaced. The robbery theory was eventually dismissed, as the killer had left cash and valuables untouched, implying that the sole motive had been to eliminate the family members. Additionally, the power outage that occurred on the night of the murders suggested that the perpetrator was familiar with the location of the electrical panel. The killer's ability to navigate the darkened house without difficulty indicated prior knowledge of its layout. While reviewing the case, an investigator re-examined the recording of Kathy's emergency call in search of overlooked clues. The tape captured Kathy's frantic attempt to describe the horrific scene, her voice trembling between sobs. At the end of the call, Kathy mentioned her husband's name and spoke to him in Cantonese. This detail drew the investigators' attention, prompting them to have the conversation translated. The translation revealed that Kathy had been pleading with Robert not to leave her alone in the house. This was a significant revelation, as Robert had indeed left Kathy at the crime scene to fetch her parents, despite the obvious danger. With 5 people brutally murdered and the killer possibly still inside, Robert's calmness seemed suspicious, as though he already knew there was no threat. Police soon identified Robert as the primary suspect. A key piece of evidence was that Robert possessed a key to Min's house, which Min had given him shortly before the murders. However, Robert had never disclosed this information during questioning, and even Kathy had been unaware that her brother had entrusted him with the key. It was Brenda who accidentally revealed this crucial fact to investigators. Further inquiries uncovered that Robert's claims of being a successful ear, nose, and throat specialist were false. Although he held a medical degree, he had never maintained a stable career in medicine. There were rumors that he had fled to Australia to evade possible punishment for bribery charges in China. In Australia, Robert failed to build a successful business and squandered his remaining savings on a series of failed ventures. After relocating to North Epping, he became increasingly idle, relying entirely on his wife's income for support. After Brenda's guardianship papers were finalized, Robert began behaving as though he were the rightful heir to the Lin family's estate. His first act was to evict Yun's parents from the home Min had purchased for them. Although the property remained under Min's name, Min and Kathy's parents were still permitted to live in the house that had also been bought for them. Based on this pattern, investigators began to suspect that Robert had long harbored a plan to seize the Lin family's assets, including their money, property, and profitable business. However, the police could not arrest him without solid evidence. Through a combination of interrogations, surveillance, and forensic investigation, the task force secured authorization to install hidden cameras inside Robert's home. Their goal was to collect incriminating evidence that could directly link him to the murders. The breakthrough arrived sooner than expected, beginning with an unprompted remark from Kathy during an interrogation. She mentioned Robert's fondness for a particular brand of limited edition sneakers. Several years earlier, Robert had purchased 2 pairs. He had worn one pair until it was ruined and discarded, but kept the second pair at home in pristine condition. Crucially, Robert's shoe size, 9.5, matched the bloody shoe prints found at the crime scene. The hidden cameras soon captured decisive footage, Robert deliberately destroying the box that had once contained the remaining pair of sneakers. Following this discovery, police obtained a search warrant for his residence. During the search, investigators located a new pair of size 9.5 sneakers identical in tread pattern to those found at the scene. In the garage, they also uncovered a faint bloodstain that forensic testing later confirmed contained the DNA of all 5 Lin family victims, irrefutable evidence linking Robert to the crime. In May 2011, nearly 2 years after the massacre, Robert was officially arrested. He denied any involvement, claiming that the blood in his garage must have been transferred there when he returned from the Lin home after the murders. He dismissed the significance of the sneakers, insisting they were new and unrelated to the crime, as he had already disposed of the old pair. While awaiting trial, Robert was placed in a cell with several informants arranged by investigators. During conversations with them, he revealed chilling details, admitting that he had meticulously planned the murders, selected a hardware store without surveillance cameras to purchase the weapon, and drugged his wife's tea to ensure she would sleep through the killings. He claimed to have disposed of the hammer, shoes, gloves, and clothes to eliminate any traceable evidence. Despite these admissions, Robert denied all allegations when the case went to trial. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the informant's testimonies and circumstantial forensic evidence. The jury initially failed to reach a guilty verdict, leading to Robert's release on bail in December 2015. However, when the trial resumed in June 2016, a new informant came forward with additional revelations. Robert had confessed to being obsessed with Brenda since she was 13. When Brenda was questioned again, she broke down in tears and revealed that Robert had sexually abused her shortly after she moved in with him and Kathy. She had remained silent out of fear for her safety. This devastating revelation, combined with the existing forensic and testimonial evidence, sealed Robert's fate. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, one for each of the 5 victims. All of Robert's subsequent appeals were denied, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Moving on to the next case. Theodore Shaughnessy. In the early morning hours of March 2, 2018, the quiet night at the Shaughnessy residence was abruptly disturbed. The home's alarm system was remotely deactivated, leaving the property vulnerable as 2 intruders slipped inside through a side window. The family dogs, sensing danger, began barking frantically, awakening Ted Shaughnessy. Still drowsy but intent on protecting his family, he grabbed his firearm and headed toward the kitchen. Before he could grasp the full situation, a figure emerged from the darkness, and gunfire echoed throughout the house. Theodore Shaughnessy was born on February 7, 1963, in Los Angeles, California. He was one of 3 children born to Teresa and David Shaughnessy, with his brothers, Thomas and Timothy, completing the family. Although little is known about Theodore's early life, he was widely recognized, even as a teenager, for being kind, compassionate, and approachable on nearly any subject. He deeply cared for the well-being of his family and friends. After completing high school, Theodore developed an interest in California's thriving gem and jewelry industry. He enrolled in specialized courses offered by the American Gem Society and eventually earned his certification as a jeweler. In the mid-1980s, during a trip to Phoenix, he met a young woman named Corey at a game arcade. Corey, born in 1966 in the small town of Wickenburg, Arizona, had a love for painting that inspired her to pursue a degree in fine arts. She devoted herself almost entirely to capturing the desert landscapes that surrounded and fascinated her. After meeting, Theodore and Corey discovered a mutual passion for jewelry design and craftsmanship. Their relationship quickly deepened, and Theodore soon relocated to Arizona to be closer to her. Under his guidance, Corey began studying gem classification, and together they dreamed of opening their own jewelry business. While waiting for their dream to take shape, Theodore worked at several local pawn shops, and once Corey completed her degree, she joined him. In 1988, the couple married, and a few years later, after perfecting their craft and gaining valuable experience, they moved to Austin, Texas, to bring their shared vision to life. In 1995, they finally opened their own jewelry store. Theodore's dedication and enthusiasm were reflected in every detail of his work, whether he was searching for rare gemstones or assisting customers in finding the perfect piece. His patience and kindness quickly made the shop a beloved fixture in the community and earned him a reputation as a generous, warm-hearted man. Through their business success, the couple accumulated a net worth of roughly $6 million, which allowed them to build an elegant home on the outskirts of the city. Despite their success, one thing was missing: a family. For reasons never publicly disclosed, the couple decided to adopt rather than have biological children. After completing the necessary paperwork, they received the joyous news in early 2000 that a child was waiting for them in Ukraine. Their journey to meet the child was filled with nervous anticipation, but the moment they saw the little boy, Theodore and Corey felt an overwhelming sense of peace. His name was Nicholas, and he was 16 months old. Nearly 2 years later, the new family of 3 returned to Austin, Texas, having fulfilled their dream of becoming parents. Nicholas quickly proved to be bright and inquisitive, always eager to explore and learn about the world around him. Like his parents, he developed a deep affection for animals, leading the family to adopt 2 dogs. Theodore, who had taken up car racing as a hobby, soon began bringing Nicholas to the racetrack, where the boy quickly shared his father's enthusiasm. Over time, Nicholas learned to drive under Theodore's guidance, spending countless hours practicing on a go-kart track. His interests also extended to martial arts, and he eventually earned a black belt in karate. As he entered high school, Nicholas developed an unusual fascination with finance and luxury goods for someone his age. By then, he had achieved his black belt and often discussed financial topics with his 2 closest friends, Spencer and Tyler. However, Nicholas's constant need to flaunt his wealth and possessions made others uncomfortable, including his friends. Despite this, he captured the heart of a young woman named Jacqueline, who had moved to Austin from New Jersey following her parents' divorce. Jacqueline and Nicholas began dating, and in 2016, Nicholas introduced her to his family. Although the evening started off somewhat awkwardly, by the end of dinner, Theodore and Corey were charmed by Jacqueline. Having suffered physical abuse at the hands of her father, Jacqueline found refuge in the Shaughnessy home. Once Corey learned the reason behind Jacqueline's frequent stays, she welcomed her to live with them permanently. The young couple settled into a room on the ground floor of the house. Always nurturing, Corey did her best to care for Jacqueline and even gifted her a beautiful diamond pendant for her 19th birthday, in keeping with the family's passion for gemstones. As Nicholas neared the end of high school, his obsession with earning money grew stronger. He even wrote a detailed article for the school newspaper outlining a plan to become wealthy by working from home through stock trading. In July 2017, after graduating from high school, his mother agreed to lend him $30,000 to start his own business. A month later, Nicholas and Jacqueline moved into an apartment complex in College Station, about 2 hours east of Austin. Shortly thereafter, with the help of Spencer, who had become an ordained minister, the young couple secretly married. Jacqueline focused on her university studies, while Nicholas worked from home as a stockbroker. As their social circle grew, Nicholas seized every chance to boast about his purportedly thriving ventures. In truth, however, his business was failing and he was losing money. He borrowed $2,600 from a neighbor, assuring her he would repay it with profits from his investments. Simultaneously, Nicholas had taken out additional loans that were rapidly coming due, pushing his finances into a precarious state by early 2018. When Jacqueline discovered their monetary troubles, the couple argued and began to consider drastic options to recover. What began as a flippant joke about inheriting Theodore and Corey's wealth soon hardened into a concrete plan. After all, if Theodore and Corey were gone, Nicholas would stand to inherit a $2 million life insurance payout, plus roughly $6 million in business and property assets. Within days, the notion evolved into an actionable scheme, and the couple even agreed to hire someone to kill Theodore and Corey. Nicholas first approached his friend Spencer with the proposition, offering $50,000, but Spencer refused outright. These early rejections did not deter them. By mid-February 2018, Nicholas had turned to social media to continue his search for a willing accomplice. He contacted a woman who worked in his apartment complex and offered extra money. When she asked what the job entailed, he proposed killing 2 people for $20,000 per victim. She never replied again, and like the neighbor who had lent him money, her identity has been withheld for safety reasons. Nicholas encountered similar refusals from a third person he approached. Undeterred, on Friday, February 23, 2018, he went to a local bar and struck up a conversation with Johnny Leon, a 21-year-old with prior drug convictions. After explaining the job, Nicholas offered Johnny $100,000, with payment to be made in installments. As they discussed the arrangement, Nicholas texted Jacqueline to share the supposed breakthrough. When she asked about the cost, he downplayed her concerns. That night, Johnny and Nicholas agreed to meet later at Nicholas's home to finalize plans. On Monday, February 26, 2018, Corey called her son to ask why he had not yet repaid the loan she had given him. The awkward call escalated into an argument, leaving Nicholas feeling even more pressured to resolve his financial crisis. On the morning of Wednesday, February 28, 2018, before meeting Nicholas, Johnny invited his friend Cameron Bosmek, who worked locally, claiming it was a moving job. Cameron, unaware of any wrongdoing, agreed. When Cameron and Johnny later arrived at Nicholas's house, security cameras captured their arrival. Once inside, Nicholas disclosed the true nature of his plan. He explained that he would remotely deactivate the security alarm from his phone to give them access to his parents' home. They were to enter through a window in one of the rooms where they would find a gun hidden in a drawer. Nicholas offered Cameron $10,000, payable in 3 installments. But the moment he finished speaking, Cameron refused to take part and walked out immediately. Later that day, back at home, Cameron confided in his wife about the disturbing proposal. Meanwhile, left alone with Johnny, Nicholas offered to accompany him on the mission. That night, the two drove to Austin, but after several hours, Nicholas lost his nerve and decided not to go through with it, prompting them to return to College Station. The following day, Johnny introduced Nicholas to Ariane Smith, a 23-year-old recently released from prison after serving time for drug-related offenses. Despite his criminal history, Ariane agreed to join the plot. Nicholas reviewed the plan once more, and they decided to carry out the attack on March 2, 2018. On Thursday, March 1, 2018, Theodore and Corey wrapped up their regular workday at the jewelry store. After dinner, they went to bed as usual. Meanwhile, Johnny and Ariane exchanged numerous messages to coordinate the upcoming crime. They met later that night and drove to Austin, arriving around 4:30 a.m. Once Nicholas remotely disabled the home's alarm system, the two intruders entered the house. Following Nicholas's instructions, Ariane retrieved the gun from the designated drawer. However, the family dogs, disturbed by the noise, began barking frantically, waking Theodore and Corey. Still half asleep, Theodore grabbed his firearm and moved toward the kitchen. Acting quickly, Ariane fired several rounds, striking Theodore and causing him to collapse. Amid the commotion, one of the intruders also shot one of the family dogs. The sound of gunfire jolted Corey into action. She grabbed her own gun, positioned herself in the bedroom doorway, and fired down the hallway, determined to defend her home even though she couldn't see the attackers. Her shots did not hit the intruders, but they were enough to frighten them into fleeing. After they escaped, Corey hid in a closet and called emergency services. It was nearly 5 a.m. when police arrived, delayed because they initially went to the wrong address. During those agonizing minutes, Corey stayed on the phone with the 911 operator. When instructed to leave the closet and open the door for the responding officers, both Corey and police were confronted with the devastating aftermath of the attack. Theodore was pronounced dead at 5:14 a.m. Through tears, Corey called her son to deliver the heartbreaking news. As Nicholas and Jacqueline began their drive to Austin, the medical examiner confirmed that Theodore had died from multiple gunshot wounds. Meanwhile, detectives began their investigation. What immediately stood out to them was the sheer number of bullet holes, both in the walls and across the floor. This allowed them to reconstruct the sequence of the attack with remarkable accuracy. Since only a side window was slightly open, they concluded that the intruders had likely used it as their entry point. Corey informed them that the window led to her son's former bedroom, prompting the detectives to search the room. Inside a dresser, they discovered an empty gun case and immediately wondered if the missing firearm had been used in the attack. Corey reported that nothing else appeared to be missing and that she had not seen the intruders' faces. However, she suspected that whoever was responsible likely knew about her and her husband's line of work. When Nicholas and Jacqueline arrived in Austin around 8 a.m., detectives quickly noticed Nicholas's unusually calm demeanor. Their suspicions deepened when, despite not knowing the full extent of the events, Nicholas went directly to inspect the window in his old bedroom. A few minutes later, Nicholas, his mother, and his wife went to the police station to provide statements. During questioning, Nicholas described how he had learned of the incident and told investigators he had been away from the city for nearly a month. He then handed over his cell phone for examination. Upon reviewing the device, officers discovered an app that granted remote access to the family's home alarm system. When questioned about this, Corey explained that all family members shared access, but noted that the alarm hadn't been activated that night. However, a check of the system's records revealed that the alarm had been deactivated at precisely the same time the intruders entered the house, an alarming coincidence that raised further suspicion. Jacqueline supported her husband's story, claiming they had stayed home that night. Following their statements, all three were informed they would undergo gunshot residue testing. Jacqueline's sudden nervousness caught the detectives' attention, heightening their doubts. Meanwhile, investigators continued collecting evidence at the crime scene. Due to the case's complexity, the district attorney became directly involved in the inquiry. She soon began to suspect that Theodore might have known his attacker. When no family fingerprints were found where expected, suspicion shifted toward Corey. To make matters worse, her decision to forego a funeral and request that the house be cleaned as quickly as possible only deepened investigators' doubts. As the case remained unresolved, Corey closed the jewelry store and had her husband's remains cremated. On that same day, while his mother was struggling with grief, Nicholas texted his friend Spencer, asking if he wanted to see photos of the crime scene and boasting that investigators had returned his phone, which he took as proof that he was no longer a suspect. When Corey was summoned for another interview, the questioning became so intense that she began to feel as though she was no longer being treated as a victim. By that point, however, she was not the only one under investigation. Her son had also not been entirely ruled out as a suspect. On March 5, 2018, police officers began interviewing residents at Nicholas's apartment complex. This led them to the employee Nicholas had contacted through social media, who revealed the disturbing details of his murder-for-hire proposal. A few days later, armed with a search warrant, investigators searched Nicholas and Jacqueline's apartment. There, they found ammunition matching the bullets recovered from Theodore's body, along with a marriage certificate exposing the couple's secret wedding. They also seized a computer for forensic analysis. When Corey learned of her son's hidden marriage, she was stunned. She scolded Nicholas for not doing things properly, assuring him that there had been no reason to keep it secret and that she would have gladly arranged a formal ceremony. Shortly after, Nicholas and Jacqueline moved back into the family home. Despite growing suspicions against him, Corey remained firmly convinced of her son's innocence. Determined to protect him, on March 10, 2018, She hired a team of defense attorneys and even handed over management of the jewelry store to Nicholas. Over the next several weeks, however, evidence against him continued to mount at an alarming pace. First, phone records revealed that, contrary to his initial statement, Nicholas had been in Austin 2 days before the murder. Then, investigators uncovered more incriminating text messages between him and Jacqueline. In May 2018, detectives located Spencer and brought him in for questioning. Without much hesitation, Spencer disclosed that Nicholas had expected to inherit a large fortune by eliminating his parents. He also turned over text messages proving his claims, effectively clearing himself of any suspicion. By the end of that month, Nicholas and Jacqueline were arrested. Both were charged with criminal solicitation to commit capital murder. Nicholas's bail was set at $3 million and Jacqueline's at $1 million. Faced with sworn testimonies and overwhelming evidence, Corey finally understood the full horror of her situation. Meanwhile, investigators hoped that time in custody might compel the suspects to reveal the identity of the actual shooter. When neither showed any willingness to cooperate, detectives intensified their efforts. During the first week of July 2018, one investigator meticulously reviewed security camera footage from Nicholas and Jacqueline's apartment, focusing on the days leading up to the crime. To his surprise, he spotted footage showing Nicholas greeting 2 men at the front door. One of them was wearing a shirt with the logo of a local business. Following that lead, the detective visited the company and identified the man as Cameron, quickly obtaining his address. A few hours later, when the detective arrived at Cameron's home, his wife immediately understood why the police were there. Although Cameron was not present, she shared what she knew and provided the name of Johnny. On Wednesday, July 11, 2018, when Johnny was brought to the station for questioning, he offered little resistance. It soon became clear to the detectives that they had located the accomplice they were searching for. Johnny was taken into custody and charged with capital murder. Further investigation uncovered incriminating text messages exchanged between Johnny and Arian just hours before the killing, revealing that Johnny had not acted alone. Locating Arian, however, proved difficult, but he was finally captured on December 10, 2018. During his interrogation, Arian recounted the events of that night, breaking down as the questioning progressed. He expressed deep remorse for the tragedy his actions had caused and ultimately confessed to being the one who fired the shot that killed Theodore. He also guided detectives to the location of the missing weapon, which was identified as one of Nicholas's guns. Jacqueline, on the other hand, admitted that she had known about her husband's intentions from the beginning. Her cooperation resulted in a reduced bail. With all elements ready for trial, the district attorney initially intended to pursue the death penalty against Nicholas. However, in the spring of 2021, the district attorney left office, and her successor promptly extended plea deals to the 3 defendants. The arrangement allowed them to plead guilty to a lesser charge of murder in exchange for a 35-year sentence with the possibility of parole. Ultimately, all 3 accepted the offer. By that time divorced, Jacqueline also chose to plead guilty to attempted solicitation of capital murder in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. In a virtual hearing held on April 7, 2021, the judge sentenced Nicholas and Arian each to 35 years in prison. 1 week later, Johnny Leon received the same sentence for the same crime. On June 20, 2023, Jacqueline was sentenced to 4 months in jail, 10 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service. Additionally, her passport was revoked, and she was forbidden from leaving the state of Texas without first notifying her probation officers. As part of her punishment, the court ordered Jacqueline to serve 2 days in jail every year on the anniversary of Theodore's death. Corey, unable to attend the hearing, recorded a message that was played in court as her victim impact statement. In later interviews, Corey reflected on how Nicholas and Jacqueline had destroyed a part of her world, taking away what she cherished most. With remarkable resilience, she resolved to overcome the painful loss of her husband and the profound betrayal by her son, with whom she never spoke again. Moving on to the next case. Victoria Martins. In the early morning hours of August 24, 2016, a peaceful neighborhood in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was disrupted by frantic knocking on a neighbor's door. Standing outside were Michelle Martins and Fabian Gonzalez, both injured and visibly distressed, claiming they had been attacked. Their account was erratic and filled with alarming details. However, when police officers arrived at their residence, they encountered something far more horrifying than anyone could have foreseen. What began as an ordinary night had spiraled into a nightmare. The questions surrounding what truly happened, who was responsible, and why it occurred would leave the entire community in disbelief. As investigators delved further into the case, the devastating reality of what had happened to 10-year-old Victoria Martins would shock the entire country. Victoria was born on August 23, 2006, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She was the daughter of Michelle Martins, a single mother who stated that Victoria's father had abandoned them before her birth, refusing to even see his newborn daughter at the hospital. When Victoria was only 3 months old, Michelle began a relationship with Jason Uri. He was dedicated to creating a stable family environment, and 2 years later, they welcomed a son named Matthew. Jason later expressed that he loved both his biological child and Victoria deeply, describing her as a bright, affectionate, and joyful little girl. However, after Jason and Michelle's separation, maintaining contact with the children became increasingly difficult. Victoria was remembered as a cheerful and kind-hearted girl with a radiant smile, brown hair, and light-colored eyes. Her grandparents, John and Pat Martins, adored her dearly and affectionately called her their little queen. They loved spending time outdoors with her, often taking her to a nearby Albuquerque park where she enjoyed riding her bike, skating, and playing. Victoria also had a passion for swimming and gymnastics, and her lively spirit made her well-liked by her classmates. Her grandfather John frequently said that her laughter could brighten any room and that she had a wonderfully playful sense of humor. Although little was known about the family's private life, signs of instability began to surface after Michelle and Jason separated. Michelle's life became increasingly erratic as she engaged in multiple relationships, frequently introducing new partners into her household. This behavior raised serious concerns for Jason, who feared for the children's well-being. However, Michelle dismissed his worries, insisting he had no authority to intervene in her personal affairs. In July 2016, Michelle met Fabian Gonzalez on an online dating site. Their relationship advanced rapidly, and Fabian soon moved into Michelle's home, where she lived with her 2 children. Shortly thereafter, Michelle introduced another person into their lives, Jessica Kelly, Fabian's cousin, who had recently been released from prison. Fabian insisted that Jessica had nowhere else to stay and persuaded Michelle to let her live with them temporarily. By early August 2016, both Victoria and Matthew found themselves sharing a home with 2 strangers, one of whom had a criminal background. What was once a stable household for Victoria had turned into a deeply unstable environment. Friends and relatives recalled that Michelle had once been a responsible and caring mother, but her judgment appeared to deteriorate as her relationship with Fabian and Jessica intensified. Victoria celebrated her 10th birthday on August 23, 2016, completely unaware of the horrific events that would take place in the early morning hours of the following day. On the night of August 24th, chaos broke out in their Albuquerque neighborhood. Michelle and Fabian were seen frantically knocking on a neighbor's door, visibly injured and bleeding, claiming that they had been attacked with a metal rod by Jessica Kelly. They also stated that Victoria had been assaulted. Alarmed, the neighbor immediately contacted 911, prompting a swift response from emergency services. When police officers arrived and entered Michelle's home, they encountered an appalling scene. A strong odor of smoke led them to a closed bathroom door, and what they discovered inside was beyond comprehension. Victoria's lifeless body had been dismembered, wrapped in cloth, and set on fire. Even the most experienced investigators were shaken by the gruesome sight before them. Michelle, Fabian, and Jessica were immediately detained. Although Michelle's statements initially gave investigators a starting point, her story was riddled with contradictions and inconsistencies. As detectives tried to reconstruct the sequence of events, one fact became undeniable. All 3 of the suspects had played a part in the horrifying acts that led to Victoria's death. Michelle's ever-changing accounts only added to the confusion, forcing investigators to navigate through a maze of lies and partial truths to find the reality behind the crime. In her first version, Michelle claimed that she and Fabian had been attacked by Jessica Kelly, who allegedly burst into their bedroom screaming and repeatedly asking whether they believed in God. According to Michelle's account, she attempted to escape the house to get help when she suddenly heard Jessica shouting that Victoria was dead. However, as time passed, Michelle's story changed once more. In a revised version, she claimed that she and Fabian had left the house that night, leaving Victoria alone with Jessica, since Matthew was not home. Upon returning, Michelle said she found Victoria dead, allegedly after accidentally ingesting methamphetamine that Jessica had left on the table. In this account, she stated that Fabian and Jessica threatened to kill her if she tried to flee or report the incident, and together they decided to dispose of Victoria's body. Faced with glaring inconsistencies in her statements, detectives increased the pressure, falsely telling Michelle that Fabian was confessing in another interrogation room, a strategic move to provoke a reaction. In truth, Fabian had not yet confessed to anything. Under mounting pressure, Michelle altered her story yet again, revealing a disturbing pattern of abuse toward her children. Over the course of 8 grueling hours of interrogation, she admitted that, in the months leading up to Victoria's death, she had brought men into her home to harm her children. She confessed that she derived a perverse sense of satisfaction from watching these acts occur. According to Michelle, the pattern of abuse began when she discovered that an ex-partner had attempted to assault Victoria. Although she ended that relationship, she continued arranging encounters with other men, often drugging the children to keep them subdued during the assaults. She stated that she met these men through a dating platform, using coded language to identify individuals with similar interests. It was through the same platform that she met Fabian. Jessica's arrival in the home only intensified the violence. At first, Michelle denied any knowledge of Jessica's involvement in the abuse, but she eventually admitted that both Fabian and Jessica had assaulted Victoria multiple times in the days leading up to her death. Michelle also confessed that she had seen both Fabian and Jessica give methamphetamine to Victoria on the night she died, as she pleaded with them to stop. She further admitted to watching Jessica stab Victoria with a knife, but chose not to intervene. Disturbingly, Michelle revealed that she and Fabian had engaged in sexual activity roughly 20 minutes after Victoria's death. They then began cleaning up the crime scene before running to a neighbor's house to seek help, with Fabian following close behind her. These confessions painted a portrait of unimaginable cruelty and left investigators struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the horror. Fabian, questioned twice by investigators, gave fragmented and contradictory accounts of what had happened. In his initial interview, he claimed that Jessica had only planned to stay one more night in their home. He admitted that family members had warned him not to let her stay in the apartment, especially since 2 young children were living there. Despite recognizing the danger, Fabian said that the decision had already been made and that they felt unable to reverse it. As the interrogation continued, detectives noted discrepancies in Fabian's statements and behavior, which raised their suspicions even further. For instance, Fabian claimed that after being attacked, he and Michelle fled the apartment without attempting to help or return for Victoria, even though he professed to care about her safety. Instead of asking about Victoria's condition, he seemed more concerned about whether police had spoken to Michelle. In his second interview, Fabian provided a different and less detailed version of events, contradicting both his earlier testimony and Michelle's shifting account. After persistent questioning, Fabian finally admitted to witnessing Jessica stab Victoria, while Michelle allegedly begged them to stop. Fabian ultimately confessed, seemingly with remorse, that he should have intervened to protect Victoria. However, he justified his earlier lies by saying he had been motivated by fear. He also claimed that the injury near his eye had been sustained during his supposed fight with Jessica, a statement that was later proven false. The injury had come from an unrelated incident, further damaging his credibility. Investigators observed that Fabian's inconsistent accounts and omissions obstructed their efforts to piece together what truly happened, suggesting a deliberate attempt to manipulate the narrative and evade accountability. Jessica Kelly's testimony, by contrast, stunned investigators because it starkly conflicted with the stories told by both Michelle and Fabian. She claimed that while she and Victoria were in the apartment under the influence of drugs, an unknown man with a Mexican accent broke in. According to Jessica, this man was responsible for Victoria's death before fleeing the scene, but not before threatening to kill her if she did not dispose of the body. Certain media outlets speculated that he had warned her to handle the remains or face dire consequences, while other reports suggested that he might have been someone Fabian had known from prison who came to settle an old dispute. Jessica claimed that Fabian and Michelle returned to the apartment after the incident, at which point she and Fabian began cleaning and disposing of the remains. However, this version introduced a new, unidentified suspect whose existence could not be verified. Attempts to substantiate Jessica's account revealed that no neighbors had seen any unfamiliar person in the area that day. Furthermore, evidence collected from the crime scene failed to support the presence of this mysterious man. Jessica's credibility weakened further when neighbors reported seeing her carrying Victoria down the stairs and hearing screams from the apartment around 3 a.m., the estimated time of the crime. As the investigation advanced, authorities uncovered more disturbing information about the dynamics within the home. Among the evidence recovered was a video camera that investigators suspected might have been used to record abusive encounters involving Victoria and Matthew. Additionally, forensic findings indicated that all three adults, Michelle, Fabian, and Jessica, were directly involved in cleaning the crime scene and attempting to destroy or hide incriminating evidence. Fingerprints and other physical traces connected each of them to the cover-up. With evidence continuing to mount, Michelle, Fabian, and Jessica were formally arrested. Each was assigned a $1 million cash-only bail. Michelle was charged with child abuse resulting in death, while Fabian and Jessica faced not only the same charge, but also additional counts of sexual abuse and murder. During their preliminary hearing on September 16, 2016, all three defendants pleaded not guilty. The judge nevertheless ordered that they have no contact with one another to prevent any form of collusion or interference as the case proceeded through the courts. Detectives continued working to reconstruct the tragic series of events leading to Victoria's death, keeping all evidence under strict protection to preserve the integrity of both the investigation and the legal process. In November 2016, an autopsy report presented during another preliminary hearing sent shockwaves through the community. The report determined that Victoria's death resulted from asphyxiation due to pressure applied to her neck. It also confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and sustained multiple stab wounds. Toxicology testing, however, found no traces of illegal substances in her system, directly contradicting Michelle's previous claim that Victoria had been forced to consume drugs that night. DNA testing conducted on samples from Victoria's body, clothing, a trash bag, sheets, and a knife produced unexpected results. While male DNA was present, it was insufficient in quantity to identify any specific suspect. The testing did confirm that Fabian's DNA was absent, which led investigators to believe that the thorough cleaning carried out by the suspects had effectively destroyed critical evidence. This lack of conclusive forensic results caused significant delays in the case. In January 2017, a new prosecutor took over Victoria's case. Expressing concerns about the mishandling of the initial investigation and subsequent legal proceedings. Determined to ensure no stone was left unturned, the prosecutor assembled a new team of investigators to re-examine the case. This renewed effort aimed to uncover overlooked evidence and finally bring clarity to the events that led to the heartbreaking death of Victoria Martins. In the months following the tragedy, investigators conducted hundreds of interviews, meticulously piecing together every detail in an effort to understand how events unfolded and what could have been done to prevent them. By May, prosecutors petitioned the court to hold separate criminal trials for the three defendants to ensure fairness in each case. The motion was granted, with Michelle's trial scheduled first, followed by Fabian's and then Jessica's. However, significant delays arose due to various complications while police work continued to uncover critical evidence. A thorough review of earlier procedures revealed evidence that contradicted the narratives provided by all three defendants. Phone records showed inconsistencies in their claims about their activities on the night of Victoria's death. Judicial documents revealed that the trio had used their phones before and after the incident, communicating with each other and with other individuals. GPS analysis further demonstrated that neither Fabian nor Michelle was in the apartment at the estimated time of the crime, casting further doubt on their statements. Authorities reconstructed the timeline of events leading up to Victoria's death, analyzing movements between the afternoon of her 10th birthday and the fatal early morning hours. Victoria arrived home by bus around 4 p.m., at which time Fabian and Michelle were not present. The couple returned briefly before leaving again multiple times throughout the evening, with their final return occurring shortly before the confrontation with Jessica. Investigators determined that at least one of these outings was for the purpose of purchasing drugs, explaining why Victoria had been left alone in Jessica's care. This new timeline prompted detectives to send DNA samples to an advanced laboratory in Florida for more detailed analysis. The results led to the dismissal of several charges against Michelle and Fabian after evidence confirmed that neither was inside the apartment at the time of Victoria's death. However, the most startling revelation from the Florida lab validated one of Jessica's most disputed claims, the presence of an unidentified man. This discovery opened new investigative pathways and ran parallel to the ongoing court proceedings. Jessica's trial concluded first. In September 2018, a judge rejected her initial plea deal. By January 2019, she was acquitted of sexual abuse charges due to insufficient forensic evidence. Nonetheless, fingerprints found at the scene linked her to critical actions, including handling items used in the aftermath of the murder. Jessica later admitted to cleaning up and attempting to flee, attributing her behavior to guilt and paranoia triggered by heavy drug use. She even described waking Fabian in the middle of the night and asking him to read Bible passages aloud in an effort to calm her hallucinations. In a surprising turn of events, Jessica ultimately accepted a plea agreement in which she admitted to reckless child abuse resulting in death. In return, other charges were dropped, and she agreed to testify against Fabian and the unidentified man should he ever be identified and brought to trial. In April 2022, Jessica was sentenced to 50 years in prison, with 6 years suspended, leaving her to serve 44 years behind bars. Upon release, she will remain under supervision for 5 additional years. Fabian's trial, in contrast, was repeatedly delayed. In an unexpected decision in November 2019, the court granted his release on probation, citing insufficient evidence to demonstrate that he posed a threat to public safety. His trial finally began in July 2022. As part of her plea agreement, Jessica testified against him, recounting the moment the unidentified man entered the apartment and detailing Fabian's role in cleaning and dismembering Victoria's body afterward. She also revealed that, during a drug-induced breakdown, she had contemplated killing both Fabian and Michelle before setting the apartment on fire. Prosecutors ultimately focused their case on proving Fabian's involvement in tampering with evidence. A forensic scientist was called to testify, presenting conclusions drawn from over 80 separate pieces of evidence. Although Fabian's fingerprints appeared only on a mop, indicating his role in cleaning the scene, prosecutors maintained that he still bore responsibility for Victoria's death. Jessica's statements, combined with the physical evidence, depicted Fabian as being involved in the aftermath, though uncertainty persisted regarding his exact role in the crime itself. Consequently, prosecutors requested that the child abuse charge be classified as a violent felony, which would require Fabian Gonzalez to serve at least 85% of his sentence before qualifying for parole. The defense objected to this classification, arguing that Fabian should not be held accountable for the crime. They stressed that the original allegations stemmed from Michelle's false confession and asserted that the real perpetrator remained unidentified. In late 2022, Fabian Gonzalez received a sentence of 37.5 years in prison. However, according to the terms of his sentencing, he could apply for parole after serving half of his term. During the proceedings, John Martins, Victoria's grandfather, delivered a victim impact statement, pleading with the judge to enforce the maximum punishment possible. He voiced his deep sorrow over losing the opportunity to watch Victoria grow up, graduate, or walk down the aisle, moments that he and his family had long envisioned. Michelle Martins was the final defendant to be sentenced, and her case posed particular challenges. Because of her numerous conflicting versions of events and the absence of evidence supporting crucial elements of her statements, including claims of sexual encounters with unidentified individuals, authorities determined that a psychological assessment was necessary. The results revealed that Michelle displayed personality traits that made her highly prone to giving false confessions. A specialist who evaluated her testified in court, describing Michelle as one of the most easily influenced individuals he had ever encountered. This finding led prosecutors to offer a plea deal, which Michelle accepted in June 2018. She acknowledged her responsibility for entrusting Victoria to Jessica's care, an act that ultimately resulted in her daughter's death. Although her admission of guilt occurred in 2018, her sentencing was postponed for 4 years. At last, in November 2022, Michelle received a 12-year prison sentence, with 6 years credited for time already served. Victoria Martin's case stands as a tragic reminder of the dangers faced by children in unsafe environments. Throughout the extended legal process, the community united to honor Victoria's memory and advocate for meaningful change. They also gathered to support the law enforcement officers who had confronted the horrific crime scene, ensuring they were recognized for their difficult and courageous work. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.